it's a nice straightforward farm. Its soil is light, which means we can work it any day we want. In most cases, for sowing, but every field has trials in the middle of it. It might only be a hectare. It could be over half the field could be in trial. So, and what generally happens is the trial is sown first, and then the rest of the field is sown afterward.
All farmers are making progress through their harvest this year, but it is very slow going. Some farmers have finished, but others haven't passed the halfway mark yet. Yields are variable and margins are tight this year. The difficulties continue saving straw, but plans are being made already for next year's crop, with the oilseed rape planting window just 10 days away. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Many tillage farmers visited Oak Park this summer for the open day, and everyone was very complimentary about the farm and crops sown there. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Brendan Burke, who's the farm manager here in Oak Park, to chat about the harvest progress on the farm. Brendan, Oak Park is known for its light ground, and coming up to harvest, it was a really dry, hot period, particularly towards the middle of June. Do you think that had a bearing on the yields of crops this year?
It looked pretty okay as around open day and that, but we did suffer badly on the winter barley, particularly, and the early spring barley really stopped growing. I'd say at that stage by mid-June, there's no real proper grain fill. So the light ground here, and then our barley is on the lighter ground anyway. So it was quite poor, I would say. The winter barley, very early, probably week 10 days earlier than average. What is an average? But we were definitely happy.
So you weren't optimistic looking into the harvest.
No.
And then the harvest, as it came along, it obviously the weather changed. But did the amount of dry weather that was there, do you think that made it or pushed the harvest in a little bit earlier, or pulled it in a little bit earlier?
It pulled it in a little bit earlier, but in the overall, we actually probably finished the winter barley around the same time because it was terribly broken, literally from the 2nd of July onwards. I would normally be expecting to start the winter barley here kind of the 10th of July onwards. So we were harvesting a week early, but we needed all the days anyway from the 2nd of July onwards. It really was every other day you were in and out trying to harvest, but okay. It was well ripe at that stage by the 15th, 20th of July when we were finishing, which was slow enough.
Just for people listening here, it might be a really good idea just to give people a bit of context as regards Oak Park, because it's not a case of we have a great big combine and going to roar around the whole place and get it finished up like a normal farmer. There's an awful lot of trials here. There's 6,000 or 7,000 plots, or maybe there's more, I can't remember now, but there's a whole heap of plots out here, and there's a little bit of tricking around to be done trying to get that. You might explain a little bit how that works.
Yeah, basically every field here, it's a nice farm. It's a nice straightforward farm. Its soil is light, which means we can work it any day we want. In most cases, for sowing, but every field has trials in the middle of it. It might only be a hectare. It could be over half the field could be in trial. So, and what generally happens is the trial is sown first, and then the rest of the field is sown afterwards. So when that comes along to harvest time, unless you really start swapping out varieties for earlies versus lates, but the trial may be involved in varieties anyway. So it does mean that you have to get in at that trial area and harvest it with the smaller plot combines. Now we've 4 plot combines really. 3 that are working every day on plots, and 1 is a backup combine. It's a pretty old one, but they all do their stuff. But we wouldn't like to start counting acres of harvest or hectares that we harvest in a day as number of plots. So they will probably harvest somewhere between 300 and 500 on a very good day, plots a day. But we have up to 10,000 plots to harvest. So they're all quite busy, and
they not only harvest in Oak Park, but they go to the outside sites as well. So they have to load them up into a truck and bring them off to Cork and Tipperary and Meath.
Yesterday was just a trial in Cork. It was in 2 sites in Cork, but not terribly far away. But the combine left here yesterday morning at 7:30 and was back at about 8 o'clock yesterday, 9 o'clock, with 2 trials harvested in Cork. But that meant the farmer, we had to happy with that the farmer was okay for us to cut, that he'd cut out around the trial and get down there. And 2 guys, 1 guy sampling on the combine, 1 guy driving, and he's also the truck driver, and he takes it down there and takes it off on, and it's a big day's work. But they got through 450 plots plus driving to Cork and back from here. Now that doesn't happen every day, but he's moving to Tipperary today as well. Hopefully he'll get to do.
So if we go back and we think then just about a field. So let's just say we have a 10-acre field, and there's some plots in the middle of that field. Do you, in terms of the process, do you come in with the large combine first and cut around the headlands, and then you get the little smaller combine go in the middle, or what way does what's the
ideally that works? Now, obviously, if the crop is ripe and the headlands aren't, we have to cut into it, as we call. But we generally leave enough around it that we can cut around the plot area first. But generally, I would like to, from a farm management point of view, is cut all the external of the field, and then we've one combine which we dedicate just to cutting tram lines, which sounds a bit odd, but it's an old Deutz with an 8-foot head, so he's cut out the tram lines, and then the plots are all left after that then. So it makes the guy that's cutting the plots then that he's not busy cutting out tram lines and discard bits. So every field will have that. Ideally, we get to cut the headlands first, but it doesn't always work that way. The big combine, it's fine. It's a 6 meter header on it. It'll zoom through it fairly quick, but you have to be mindful. You can't just drive straight through a field. You have to, yeah.
And you mentioned there that there's a person in lots of these plot combines actually taking samples. So those samples are in a little bag, or what size are they?
Each plot is the plots. Normally we say are there's a 12-meter tramline system, but so we cut off 2.5 meters each. So you've left with 9 plus 9.5 meters left. So that then is cut. It's by the width of our combine, which is 2.5, so it's 9 by 2.5, and then the technician in the combine will take a sample off that plot. And the combine, some of the combines, the more modern ones, we have 2 modern ones which will take moisture and hectoliter and give us a good representation of that. And it takes, even within that plot, it takes 10 sub-samples. So it's not just one exact reading. So it's 10 moistures possibly within. It's according to the weight that's off the plot, but it generally takes every kilo. It's taken every. And
for most of those little trial plots, are you taking a physical sample away as well, or not?
It's according to if it's for plant pathology, they might just be interested in yield, moisture, hectoliter. But if it's talking about say nitrogen or varieties or proteins, then you have to take a sample off them. So it's probably a little over half we take samples off probably taking maybe a half kilo sample off each plot and bring that into the lab then and do screenings or whatever else is.
What happens, because this is a tricky harvest obviously, but what happens when the moisture levels are a bit high in those? I mean, are they dried afterwards, or how does that work?
Well, if we're it's what we're looking for them. If we're looking for proteins and all that, we will probably dry them. But initially, we'll definitely get a proper moisture in the lab, proper screenings. But they will be air dried for. It could only take 24 hours on a drying table, but they're not, because if they further process them with them, you can't distort them by drying them down completely either. So you have to get your exact measurements on that. So it's
okay. So there's a bit of a process, certainly in that.
Sometimes the field is the easier part, that you have a lot more to do in the lab afterwards, because the technician will take the sample, but then he can't do them the next day because he's harvesting another plot. So he has to wait, and hopefully they don't. If they're too damp, he has to mind that they don't. He has to put them in the fridge maybe, so they don't change their start heating or that. So
you've that field, the plot combine. You're just doing a little bit around the outside with the big combine. Plot combine comes in, gets rid of the trial in the middle, and you come back with the major combine then afterwards. That's kind of clean up afterwards. Yeah. In lots of farmers, I suppose, lots of farmers out there at the moment are straw chopping. Do you have the option of doing that on the big combine and on the trial combines?
We have on the big combine. We will chop all our oats and particular fields just to match our payments, same as every other farm. But we have on the plot, one of the plot combines, we have the ability to chop it. But I'm not particularly mad about it, because the combine has to stop at the end of every plot. Now, it's literally only for 20 seconds, but it would mean he's dumping all the straw into one place. So for our next year's trial, you have a difference in nutrients then. You'd have a high, and you'd say, what happened here? And it's probably got to do with the straw. So we nearly always remove the straw from any of our trials.
Which to a degree is another headache, and the fact that you have all these small little lines in the middle of the field going different directions and all sorts, and you have to tidy it up. How's the straw tidying up down this year? Is it difficult as everybody else, or
fun times? But I suppose we were lucky in a way that we have one farmer buys a lot of our winter barley on the flat, and he's quite happy to come in and bale that, and he rakes it up. He generally does rake it up into larger rows, into 6 or 8 meter rows, because our combines are only 2.5 for the plots. But all around the field, he'll have the decent rows. But our spring barley or any the wheat, we have to look after that ourselves. So again, it's a little bit tricky that you have to. We chopped all our oat and straw, so that wasn't a problem. But our spring barley that we've started, again, it got wet and it got dry and it got wet. So we've got some yesterday. We tied it up a bit yesterday, so it's not bad. It's not a lot of straw on it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's tricky enough. So you're getting through the crops reasonably well. You've your winter barley finished, your oilseed rape finished, your rye finished. Did I hear you were saying?
Rye there yesterday even. We have about 20 hectares of rye, which is Richie Hackett's doing a lot of research on it, and then there's a student doing a PhD on rye as a human food, obviously, but it actually is quite impressive with very little attention to from my part, as it's not a new crop, but it got the basic treatments, a kind of I'd say a spray and a half for fungicide, but really 5 ton, a 5 ton an acre, comfortable over most of the field. And because it's in and out, we've plots everywhere in it as well. So it's a big field of it and a huge amount of straw. That's the problem. It was quite not flat lodged, but really tangled into each other. So we actually had the side knives on the combine for rape. Now it looked like a bit of was this going to cut heads off, but it actually worked out very well. The side knives on the combine.
There was no, even though it was tangled and pushed down on itself, there's nothing lost.
It was probably easier to cut. It dried better than the wheat did on the same day, because we're trying to cut wheat. Was wheat easier to cut? This is last Thursday or Friday, I think, was a kind of catchy sort of day, but the rye was actually a little bit drier, so it didn't get as wet or didn't get as broken down as you might have thought. It didn't break down. So it's probably a ripe maybe more than a week, where the wheat was just ripe. So maybe that helped it a little bit. I'm not sure how well it is if you had a bigger area, but how you'd manage it if it was getting too late for it. Which
have now have a mountain of straw to deal with. Have you got a market for that?
We have actually. Yeah, there's a guy buys it for big square bales, and it goes for bedding carrots. So I believe anyway. But it's another farmer interested as well, that he was buying it, wanted to buy it, that he sold some last year for feed in a ration that appeared to be better than wheat.
Okay.
That's his opinion, I'm sure.
You mentioned spring barley there a second ago, and we were chatting earlier, and you were saying you were combining a little bit yesterday, but there's a lot of green grains out there, and green heads the same as everywhere else. How's that?
It seemed to be getting greener rather than riper. So with one little field there, and the middle of the field and patches were 18%, 70%, but areas in the 22% moisture. So that's not fun. It's cuttable, but I'm sure the merchant won't be that happy when he sees this mixed grain coming in. So we have more of that to cut. It's quite late sown, purposely sown late. We have some for Louise McNamara BYVD trials that we wanted so late and so early. So the half the field is sown late. Is quite green in places, but there's also a lot of grass in it. So we've had to do the necessary with that and put some glyphosate on it. So because it looked like there was actually tillers and grass competing badly with it. So if the weather stays broken as it is, you would have great difficulty cutting it. So.
Well, I think you're not the only one. I think, and I suppose in particular, we're seeing that around the country in lighter ground where it might have got a bit stressed in June, and those areas seem to be even greener than the rest of it. Maybe the plants sort of half died out and you're getting some back up again. So, but of course, every year kind of goes around, you kind of rinse and repeat to a degree, and they were kind of back planning again this year. So we would have had, or here on the farm, there's oilseed rape on it every year. Yeah. Did that go okay this year? Did you? Or?
It went okay. It wouldn't be. It was a nice even crop, I suppose, across the whole field, but there was evidence of club root in it, which we were meant to do a trial in one of the fields, and this is the second year in a row on a totally different part of the farm. Would be in a 6-year rotation with oilseed rape, but there seems to be club root in patches in it, which leaves us to leave it out this year. We don't necessarily need it. We have good rotation with beans and with oats, so we're going to leave it out this year. Now that won't solve the club root, but to see because we have a bit of cover crops as well. Now we haven't used brassicas in cover crops as such, but some of the mixes we did 4 or 5 years ago would have had brassicas in them. So it's a tricky one now. We're not going to get rid of it easily. We just want to see where we are with it, and if we need to do any trials on oilseed rape, hopefully go out on a commercial farm.
It's a big change, though, isn't it? I mean, having that essentially excluded to a degree from certainly the field you had it in. It's been confirmed.
We could obviously. I mentioned it to some of the researchers here, and we said we could do a trial on club root, but because maybe it's the type of soil we have that it's a bit, or is it everywhere? It's not. We're not sure.
Well, look, certainly from anecdotally around the country, you're not the only one. There is definitely club root turning up in places that hasn't been around for a long time. So it's right. Well, that's going to be a big differential. Yeah. So if when Oak Park is doing, and we'll continue to do trials in oilseed rape, it'll probably have to be on outside farm.
For the moment anyway, we'll see, because there is fields here which wouldn't necessarily have had oilseed rape maybe in 10 years. But, you know, we don't want to just go straight in without having a bit more reasons to do it, you know.
So are you down then to the harvest? Are you just down to finishing out your spring barley and a bit of beans and that kind of thing?
40 acres of spring barley, which will probably be next week, hopefully, and then beans and about 25 acres of beans, which now there's time of sowing trials and that, and there's also double cropping, well, peas and beans mixes. Yeah. So they've been taking those out literally as they come right with the plot combines as well. So it's a patchwork quilt, the whole field, but the main crop we sowed some in February, which will probably be probably right next week, I'd say, as well. So, but then a lot of it is actually sown late March, really, which is not ideal, but it's as good a test as any of it.
Okay, so with most of the fields cleared then, have you thought about stubble cultivation, which is kind of required, I suppose, as well? Because I suppose people might forget that we're a farm. We're a farm the same as any other farm, and all of the rules from cross-compliance and everything, it's probably, it extends to here as same as any other farm.
Yeah, and rightly so, but we will get inspected, and we have got inspected for cross-compliance and all sorts of things, but we have all our oats has been chopped, which is quite easy then to go in the next day, literally, and made a good mulch there of disking that in. Now, the barley, most of it is still in bales on the field or in rows, so we haven't really got to move a lot of that, but it's the priority now that we're down to the last bit of, so we're moving bales today even, and hopefully get to disc them maybe tomorrow or the next day if it isn't too wet.
Yeah. But as you say, you can probably work in most circumstances here in Oak Park anyway, so it's relatively dry.
No problem, yeah. And then we'd probably sow maybe 20-30 extra cover crop as well then on some of the lighter fields, because we feel the spring barley ones there that we're literally barely doing 2.5 ton on light soil, but there's very little organic matter in those fields at all. So we're hoping to maybe go on a really 4 or 5 years of cover crops in those with spring barley to bring it back up, you know, and maybe chop straw on it in the next couple of years as well, and sacrifice whatever we get for the barley syrup, because there's not a lot of straw on it, and it's just very light.
To try and build it. Speaking of which, in terms of the cover crops, the mixes are very crucial, I suppose, in terms of building up disease or not building up disease, as the case may be. You mentioned club root. I presume you're going to exclude brassicas from that, or what you're thinking about the cover crop mix that you're going to use?
Yeah, it's you're limited enough, so it's really only Phacelia and vetch, really, I suppose, we'll use. And they have a mix there. The co-op has a mix there, which we'll probably use, commercial mix, so we'll use that.
Right, you're not inclined for oats or for rye or anything else?
Because we have oats, a lot of oats in trials here, so I probably don't want to mix up. And there's not an issue with growing it in it, but it's complicated that if you've gone back in maybe with oats, that when we're doing research on oats, you don't want too much oats after oats, even if it's just a cover crop or spring crop. So we're trying to leave the oats as a standalone crop, you know.
So the Phacelia, I suppose, going back to them, Phacelia is a crop species that doesn't interfere with anything in rotation whatsoever. And vetch, yes, it probably might interfere maybe a little bit with some of the beans, but maybe less so kind of over time. That's your thinking, is it?
Yeah, and it is on the lighter soils that we'll put the cover crops. I'm not sure that's the best policy, but if there is beans, they would generally go on the heavier soils. There's heavy, it's all relative now to Oak Park. Heavy is not heavy, and a lot of other people's farms, but it is. We would beans really suffered here. They're not bad this year because they are on one of our heavier fields, but they really would suffer with drought here badly when we had them in the lighter soils.
Your timings of putting in the cover crops, are you starting soon? Or?
Yeah, it's literally in the next
day or so.
Yeah.
Before the weekend is kind of what your plan is, right? Sooner we get them in, I suppose. There's good research from Richie Hackett in Oak Park to suggest that the earlier you can get them in August.
A week at this time of the year apparently is worth a month.
Exactly, yeah. So it's going to be a huge difference. Yeah. Brendan, you have a huge amount on your plate. I see there's more tractors going out the window here, so I'm sure they'll be calling for you there shortly. So listen,
it's all the fun. All the fun of the day.
Thanks very much for joining me on the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks.
So that's it for this week, and my thanks to Brendan for joining me on the show. Just a reminder again, a date for your diary is Friday, September the 8th, when we'll have the Crops Forum in the Killashee Hotel, Naas. We will cover a number of topics this year, including new varieties, agronomy for the autumn, the new MAC or climate change model for tillage, and also a discussion forum with stakeholders around the future for the tillage industry. Finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review, and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.